Few engines in history can claim to have shown as much promise and terror as the Fiat S76. Developed as a pure speed demon in 1911, this absolute monster packed 28.4 liters of displacement into what was essentially a barely contained explosion on wheels. And yet, despite all of this raw mechanical violence, it never actually set the record it was built to break. What's the first thing that comes to mind when I say biggest engine ever put in a car? Some American muscle car? How about a modern hypercar? Never heard of the Fiat S76? What if I told you this Italian beast made those look like lawnmower engines? 28,433 cubic centimeters. That's not a typo. That's 1,734 cubic inches for you Americans out there. To put that in perspective, that's bigger than 2 Bugatti Veyron engines combined. In a car built when the Wright brothers were still newsworthy. I mean, come on, imagine trying to contain nearly 30 liters of internal combustion in 1911. Now imagine doing it with the metallurgy of the era. Now imagine strapping yourself to it and trying to go 200 kilometers per hour on tires that belonged on a bicycle. That's exactly what happened with the Beast of Turin. But here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't some rich eccentric's pet project. This was Fiat, yes, that Fiat, going completely off the rails in pursuit of pure speed. At a time when most cars struggled to hit 60, they were building something that could theoretically break 130 miles per hour. The story starts, as many great automotive stories do, with a pissing contest. In 1909, the land speed record belonged to the Blitz-Benz, which had just cracked 200 kilometers per hour. This was Germany flexing its engineering muscles, and the rest of Europe wasn't having it. France tried and failed. Britain made some noise, but came up short. And Italy? Well, Italy decided to go absolutely mental. Now check this out. Fiat's approach wasn't sophisticated. It wasn't elegant. It was brutally simple. Make the biggest damn engine anyone had ever seen and figure out the rest later. While other manufacturers were pursuing advanced valve timing or exotic fuels, Fiat just said, what if we made it really, really big? The man behind this insanity was Giovanni Battista Ceirano, one of those forgotten geniuses who shaped automotive history. Ceirano looked at the Blitz-Benz's puny 21-liter engine and essentially said, hold my wine. His solution was to take Fiat's existing 4-cylinder architecture and just scale it up, way up. So with that out of the way, let's talk about what this meant in practice. Each cylinder, and remember, there were only 4 of them, displaced over 7 liters. 7 liters per cylinder. Modern V8s don't displace 7 liters total. The bore was 190 millimeters. The stroke was 250. If those numbers don't mean anything to you, imagine a piston the size of a coffee can traveling the length of a foot-long sub, 4 times per revolution. The engineering challenges were immediately apparent. Conventional casting techniques couldn't handle components this large. The crankshaft alone weighed as much as a modern engine block. Bearing technology of the era wasn't designed for these forces. Every single component had to be reimagined, rescaled, and reinforced. But Fiat pressed on. Why? Because Italian pride was at stake. The Germans had their record, and by God, the Italians were going to take it. Cost was no object. Practicality was irrelevant. This was about making a statement. The first S76 chassis was completed in late 1910. And even stationary, it was terrifying. The engine dominated everything, a massive monolith of cast iron, and barely contained violence. The cooling system alone used more water than most cars used fuel. Starting it required 2 men and a prayer. Initial testing revealed exactly what you'd expect. The thing was essentially undrivable. The massive pistons created gyroscopic forces that made steering theoretical at best. The chain drive, because of course it used chains, sounded like a medieval torture device. Visibility was a joke. Comfort was non-existent, but it was fast. Dear God, was it fast. Estimates put the power output somewhere between 290 and 300 horsepower. Now that might not sound like much today. Your mom's SUV probably makes more, but remember, this was 1911. Most cars made 20, maybe 30 on a good day. The S76 made 10 times that. The first speed runs were educational. Drivers reported that at full throttle, the entire car would twist from the torque. The frame would visibly flex. The massive exposed chains would whip and dance. It was less driving and more barely controlled explosion surfing. Here's where things get interesting, though. Despite all this power, despite the obvious speed, Fiat never officially submitted a record run. They built this monster, scared the hell out of everyone who saw it, and then nothing. The official record books show no attempt. Why? Theories abound. Some say they couldn't find a driver crazy enough. Others suggest technical problems they couldn't solve. My personal favorite theory? They realized they'd created something too dangerous to unleash. But the S76 did run. Oh boy, did it run. Private timing at Brooklyn suggested speeds approaching 135 miles per hour. Unofficial runs in Italy hinted at even higher velocities. Witnesses described the sound as apocalyptic and like the earth cracking open. Fiat built 2 of these monsters. The first remained in Italy, where it was eventually broken up, but the second car had a more interesting fate. It ended up in Australia, of all places, where it spent decades forgotten in a shed, because apparently that's where you store 28-liter racing cars. The Australian connection is where the story takes a turn. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, the surviving S76 was occasionally dragged out for demonstrations. Each time it proved it had lost none of its capacity to terrify. Drivers of the era described it as uncontrollable and demonic. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the legend grew. The S76 became the boogeyman of pre-war racing. Stories circulated of a car so powerful it twisted its own frame, of an engine so large it defied physics. Most assumed these were exaggerations. They weren't. What they didn't know, however, was that the engineering behind this beast was actually quite clever. Yes, it was brutally simple in concept, but the execution required genuine innovation. The valve gear, for instance, used a unique desmodromic design that wouldn't become mainstream for decades. The cooling system deserves special mention. With cylinders this large, hot spots were inevitable. Fiat's solution involved multiple water pumps and a radiator larger than some entire cars. Even then, sustained high-speed runs would see coolant temperatures approaching dangerous levels. But perhaps the most impressive engineering was in the bottom end. Those massive bearings had to handle forces that would tear lesser engines apart. Fiat used a combination of bronze bushings and force-fed lubrication that was revolutionary for its time. Failure still happened, but less than you'd expect. As it turned out, the real limitation wasn't engineering, but human. Driving the S76 required a unique combination of bravery and stupidity. The physical demands were enormous. No power steering meant wrestling with forces that could break your wrists. No real brakes meant planning stops well in advance. One driver described it perfectly. It's not so much that you drive the S76 as you negotiate with it. You suggest a direction and hope it agrees. You request more speed and pray it doesn't give you all of it. It's less a car and more a barely tamed force of nature. This brings us to the restoration. Remember that Australian car? In the 1990s, what remained of it was discovered and purchased by enthusiasts. What followed was one of the most ambitious restorations in automotive history. When you're rebuilding a one-of-two car with no blueprints and handmade parts, every step is archaeology. The restoration team faced challenges that would make normal people quit. Pistons the size of buckets had to be custom cast. The crankshaft, all 130 pounds of it, needed to be fabricated from scratch. Finding period-correct chains was impossible, so they had new ones made. But here's the kicker. They didn't just restore it to museum quality. They restored it to running condition. In 2003, for the first time in decades, an S76 engine fired. Witnesses described the ground shaking. Windows rattled a quarter-mile away. It was glorious. Interestingly, modern analysis revealed just how advanced some of the engineering was. The combustion chamber design was surprisingly efficient. The valve timing was aggressive, even by modern standards. This wasn't just a big dumb engine, it was a big smart engine. The restored S76 made its public debut At Goodwood in 2003, the crowd's reaction was everything you'd hope. Grown men wept, children hid behind their parents, photographers forgot to take pictures, too mesmerized by the mechanical symphony in front of them. Subsequent runs proved the car had lost none of its edge. Modern timing equipment confirmed what everyone suspected. This thing was seriously fast, not just for 1911, but genuinely quick, even by modern standards. 130 miles per hour and something with the aerodynamics of a shed remains impressive, but speed wasn't really the point anymore. The S76 had transcended its original purpose. It was no longer just about records or nationalism. It had become something more, a testament to what happens when engineers are told no limits. The philosophical implications are worth considering. Here was a car built to do one thing, go faster than anything else. It probably could have, but never got the chance. Does that make it a failure? Or does its mere existence prove the point? Furthermore, the S76 represents a fork in automotive evolution. After this, manufacturers realized there were limits to the just make it bigger approach. Development shifted to efficiency, to sophisticated valve trains, to better fuels. The era of brute force engineering was ending, yet there's something pure about the S76's approach. No turbochargers, no hybrid systems, no computer management, just massive pistons, massive power, and massive balls required to drive it. It's honest in a way modern cars can't be. Every time the restored S76 runs, it's an event, not just because of the rarity, but because of what it represents. This is rolling history, a direct link to an era when anything seemed possible, when engineers built first and asked questions later, when record-breaking was a matter of national pride. The legacy lives on in unexpected ways. Modern Fiat has nothing in common with the company that built this monster, yet occasionally you see flashes of that old insanity. The company that gave us the 500 Abarth clearly has some institutional memory of going completely mental. As most you know, I have a thing for engineering extremes, but the S76 occupies a special place. It's not the fastest car ever built. It's not the most powerful. It's not even the largest engine ever put in a vehicle, but it might be the most audacious. Think about the context again. 1911, most people still used horses. Aircraft were barely a decade old. Radio was cutting-edge technology. And here's Fiat building a 28-liter monster designed to break 200 kilometers per hour. The sheer audacity is breathtaking. Modern engineers who've studied the S76 are universally impressed. Yes, it's crude by today's standards, but the fundamental engineering is sound. With modern materials and manufacturing, the basic design could probably make even more power. Scary thought, right? One aspect rarely discussed is the economic impact. Building these cars nearly bankrupted Fiat's racing division. Each S76 cost more than dozens of regular cars. The development program consumed resources that could have gone to practical vehicles. But that's not how Italy works, is it? The human stories are equally fascinating. The men who drove these beasts were a special breed. Pre-war racing drivers were already half crazy, but S76 pilots were in a league of their own. They climbed into a car that could kill them in a dozen different ways and asked for more throttle. Pietro Bordino was perhaps the most famous S76 pilot. His descriptions of driving it are poetry mixed with horror. "The engine doesn't run," he said. "It detonates continuously. You don't accelerate, you survive acceleration. The car doesn't turn, it negotiates corners like a freight train, gradually and inevitably." The technical details remain staggering even today. Fuel consumption was measured in gallons per mile. Oil consumption was nearly as bad. The spark plugs were the size of modern fuel injectors. Everything was scaled up to absurd proportions. But here's what gets me. It worked. Despite every reason it shouldn't, despite physics suggesting otherwise, the S76 functioned. It did what it was designed to do. It went stupidly, terrifyingly fast. Engineering triumphed through sheer bloody-mindedness. You're probably asking, could something like this be built today? Technically, yes. Practically, no. Modern regulations would kill it in conception. Emissions alone would cause regulators to faint. Safety standards would require a complete redesign. The lawyers would have heart attacks, and that's kind of the point. The S76 represents a freedom we've lost. The freedom to build something insane just to see if you can. To pursue speed without consideration of consequences. To engineer without limits. It's beautiful and terrible and wonderful all at once. Modern hypercars chase the same goal, ultimate speed. But they do it with million-dollar budgets and space-age materials. The S76 did it with cast iron and courage. Which approach is more impressive? I know which one I respect more. The sound deserves special mention. Modern cars, even powerful ones, sound sanitized. Mufflers and regulations have tamed them. The S76 sounds like the Industrial Revolution having a fistfight. It's mechanical violence given voice. It's glorious. Videos don't do it justice. You need to feel it. The ground vibration travels through your feet, up your legs, into your chest. Your organs resonate with the engine's frequency. It's not just heard, it's experienced. It's automotive theater at its finest. I suspect future generations will look back at cars like the S76 with confusion. Why build something so impractical? Why pursue speed at such risk? They won't understand that sometimes the point isn't practicality. Sometimes the point is to probe the absolute limits of possible. One can only imagine what would have happened if the S76 had actually set the record. Would it have changed automotive development? Probably not dramatically, but it would have cemented Italy's place in speed history. It would have proven that brute force could triumph over sophistication. Instead, we're left with a beautiful what if, a mechanical monument to ambition, a reminder that engineers once dreamed bigger than regulations allowed. The S76 didn't need to set records. Its existence was statement enough. The restoration story deserves more detail. When Duncan Pittaway acquired the remains, pessimists said it couldn't be done. Too many missing parts, too much knowledge lost, too much time passed. They underestimated the obsession of enthusiasts. Every component had to be reverse engineered from fragments or period photos. The patterns for the massive pistons took months to perfect. Casting them required finding a foundry willing to attempt something unprecedented. Most said no. One brave soul said yes. The crankshaft alone became a multi-year project. Forging something that large with proper metallurgy required techniques barely used since the steam age. When it was finally complete, it was a work of art. Brutal, massive art, but art nonetheless. Reassembly revealed how crude yet clever the original construction was. Tolerances that would horrify modern engineers, yet everything fit. Systems that seemed impossibly simple, yet functioned perfectly. It was engineering from a different era, when craftsmanship mattered more than precision. The first start attempt was nerve-wracking. Thousands of hours of work, hundreds of thousands of dollars spent, all leading to this moment. Would it run? Would it explode? Would decades of dormancy have caused irreparable damage? It fired on the third attempt. The ground shook. Birds fled. Grown men may have shed tears, though they'll deny it. The beast of Turin lived again, mechanical resurrection in its purest form. Subsequent running has revealed the S76 to be surprisingly reliable. Yes, it's temperamental. Yes, it requires constant attention, but it runs with a consistency that shames some modern machinery. Italian engineering at its finest. Emotional, dramatic, but ultimately functional. Every outing is an event. Transport requires a special trailer. Starting requires a ritual. Running requires prayer. But when that massive engine settles into its rhythm, when those huge pistons find their dance, magic happens. It's not just a machine anymore. It's alive. The philosophical questions multiply. What does it mean to preserve something like this? Is it better in a museum, safe but silent, or running at risk but glorious? The S76 forces us to confront what we really value about mechanical heritage. I lean toward running. Machines like this weren't built to be static displays. They were built to challenge limits, to push boundaries, to make noise and smoke and drama. A silent S76 is like a caged eagle, technically preserved but spiritually dead. But that raises other questions. Every run risks damage. Original components wear out. Replacements, no matter how faithful, aren't original. At what point does the S76 stop being the S76 and become a replica? These questions keep philosophers and collectors awake at night. Maybe that's the real tragedy. Not that the S76 failed to set records, but that we've become too precious about our mechanical heritage. These machines were built to be used hard. They were built to risk everything. Preserving them in amber defeats their purpose. Yet I understand the impulse. Only one complete S76 survives. Losing it would be devastating. It's not just a car. It's a testament to human ambition. It deserves protection, but it also deserves to fulfill its purpose, even a century late. Watching the S76 run at Goodwood is witnessing time travel. For those few minutes, we're back in 1911, back when engineers were cowboys and speed was king. Back when national pride drove innovation, back when anything seemed possible if you were brave enough. The crowd reaction is always the same. Initial excitement turns to awe, turns to something deeper. People realize they're witnessing something special, not just rare, but important. The S76 reminds us what we've sacrificed for safety and sanity. Modern attendees often ask why anyone would build such a thing. The answer is simple: because they could, because someone said it was impossible, because Italy couldn't let Germany win, because sometimes you build something just to see if physics will allow it. That's perhaps the S76's greatest legacy. It proves that engineers once thought bigger than spreadsheets and regulations. They asked not, should we, but can we? And when the answer was maybe, they built it anyway. We need more of that spirit. Future generations will study the S76 like we study pyramids, as evidence of ancestral ambition we can barely comprehend. They'll wonder how anyone had the audacity to build it. They'll question the sanity of anyone who drove it. They'll be right on both counts, but they'll also miss the point. The S76 wasn't about sanity or safety or even speed, really. It was about pushing limits just to see where they were. It was about engineering without a net. It was about building something that scared even its creators. In our modern world of computer simulations and risk assessments, something like the S76 couldn't exist. It would be modeled to death, regulated to impotence, focus grouped to mediocrity. The very characteristics that make it special would be engineered out. So treasure the S76, treasure what it represents. Treasure that somewhere, somehow, engineers were once allowed to build something this gloriously stupid. Treasure that it still exists to remind us what's possible when ambition overrides sense. The numbers still stagger. 28 liters, 300 horsepower, 200 kilometers per hour in 1911. Let that sink in. Your great-grandfather wasn't born yet, and Italians were building something that could outrun modern traffic. Every component tells a story. Those massive pistons speak of foundry workers who'd never seen anything like them. The hand-formed bodywork shows craftsmen adapting to unprecedented scale. The wear patterns revealed drivers fighting forces they barely understood. It's automotive archaeology at its finest. Each restoration discovery teaches us something new. Techniques we thought were modern turn out to be century-old. Problems we assume are new were solved by men with slide rules and determination. The S76 proves something important. Progress isn't always linear. In some ways, we've moved backward. Yes, modern cars are faster, more efficient, safer, but they lack soul. They lack the raw mechanical honesty of something like the Beast of Turin. When you strip away electronics and safety systems and emissions equipment, when you reduce a car to its essential purpose, converting fuel to motion, the S76 represents a kind of purity we've lost. It does one thing with absolutely no compromise. That lack of compromise is what makes it special. Modern cars compromise constantly. Performance for economy, speed for safety, excitement for accessibility. The S76 compromises nothing. It is exactly what it appears to be. A barely controlled explosion. Future engineers study it with mixture of admiration and horror. The solutions are often crude but effective. The engineering is simultaneously primitive and advanced. It's like finding a steam engine that somehow produces jet engine power. But perhaps the most lasting impact is inspiration. Every gearhead who sees the S76 run goes home dreaming bigger. If Fiat could build this in 1911, what's our excuse? Why are we thinking so small? Where's our ambition? The S76 challenges us to think beyond practical, to engineer beyond sensible, to build beyond necessary. In a world increasingly dominated by SUVs and crossovers, we need reminders that cars can be more than transportation. Ironically enough, Fiat never capitalized on the S76's technology. They didn't develop a line of massive displacement engines. They didn't pursue land speed records. They built their monster, scared everyone, including themselves, and went back to building sensible cars. But the DNA persisted. Throughout Fiat's history, you see flashes of S76 thinking, the willingness to try something crazy, the courage to be different, the very Italian belief that emotion matters more than spreadsheets. Modern Fiat is a shadow of the company that built the S76. Corporate mergers and global economics have sanitized it. But occasionally, very occasionally, you see hints of the old madness. The S76's spirit lives on, deeply buried, but not quite dead. As we wrap up this story, and yes, it's almost over, I promise, I keep coming back to one thought. The S76 represents peak hold my beer engineering. Someone said, bet you can't, and Fiat spent a fortune proving they could. That's what I love about it. Not the speed, though. That's impressive. Not the engineering, though. That's clever. I love that it exists because someone's pride was on the line. Because Italy couldn't let Germany have something they didn't. In our modern world of focus groups and market research, we've lost that. No one builds cars anymore just to prove a point. Everything must have a business case. Everything must fill a market segment. Everything must be sensible. The S76 is gloriously, wonderfully, beautifully senseless. It serves no practical purpose. It solves no real problem. It exists purely because someone wanted to go faster than anyone else and thought 28 liters might do it. That's its legacy, not speed records or engineering innovations. Its legacy is proof that humans once built machines for no reason other than to see if they could. That engineers once answered only to physics, not focus groups. As most of you know, I believe the best machines have souls. The S76 has soul in abundance. It's not just metal and oil and fire. It's ambition made manifest. It's dreams given form. It's what happens when engineers are unleashed. So here's to the S76. Here's to 28 liters of Italian insanity. Here's to the engineers brave enough to build it and the drivers crazy enough to unleash it. Here's to machines that remind us what's possible when we stop asking why and start asking why not. The beast of Turin lives on, not just as restored metal, but as reminder. A reminder that we once built without limits. A reminder that speed mattered more than safety. A reminder that sometimes the point of engineering is simply to see what happens when you go too far. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what we need. In a world of autonomous vehicles and electric crossovers, we need reminders of when cars were dangerous and drivers were brave and engineers were slightly insane. We need the S76, because at the end of the day, that's what separates humans from algorithms. An algorithm would never approve the S76. It makes no sense. It's too dangerous, too expensive, too impractical. But humans built it anyway because humans understand that sometimes sense is overrated. The S76 stands as monument to that understanding, to the beautiful stupidity of building something just to build it, to the glorious insanity of pursuing speed without reason, to the very human need to occasionally tell practicality to fuck off. That's why it still matters. That's why people still weep when they see it run. That's why engineers still study it with awe. Not because it was successful, it wasn't, but because it dared to exist at all. In closing, I want you to imagine something. Imagine a world where every engineer thought like the S76's creators, where every designer asked, what if we just made it bigger? Where every company occasionally said, screw it, let's see what happens. It would be chaos. It would be dangerous. It would be expensive. It would be glorious. The S76 reminds us that once upon a time that world existed, and maybe if we're very lucky and slightly stupid, it could exist again. Until then, we have the beast of Turin. 28 liters of proof that humans are capable of wonderful, terrible, beautiful things when we stop being sensible. Long may it run, long may it terrify, long may it inspire, because in the end, that's what great machines do. They don't just transport or perform or function, they inspire, they challenge. They remind us that engineering is as much art as science, as much emotion as equation. The Fiat S76 is all of that and more. It's a reminder that the best things humans create aren't sensible or practical or safe. They're the things we build when ambition overrides sense, when pride matters more than profit, when someone says, impossible, and we say, watch this. So next time someone tells you something can't be done, remember the S76. Remember that in 1911, Italians built a 28-liter monster just to show Germans they could. Remember that impossible is just an opinion, and opinions were made to be proven wrong. That's the beast of Turin's real gift to us, not its speed or its power or its magnificent insanity. Its gift is permission, permission to dream stupid, permission to build crazy, permission to occasionally tell the world that sensible is overrated and impossible is negotiable. And that's why over a century later, we're still talking about it. That's why it still matters. That's why the ground still shakes and hearts still race when 28 liters of Italian pride roar to life. Because in the end, the S76 isn't just a car. It's a promise that somewhere, somehow, engineers still dream of building something that scares them. A promise that speed still matters more than safety to someone. A promise that the spirit of what if we made it really big isn't quite dead. Long live the beast. Long live insane engineering. Long live the glorious stupidity of building something just to see if physics will allow it. The world needs more S76 thinking, not less. And who knows, maybe somewhere, in some garage or workshop or corporate skunk works, someone's looking at an engine and thinking, what if we made it bigger? Maybe the beast's roar will echo once again. We can hope, we can dream, and if we're very, very lucky, we can build.